I am a penetration tester. This is my colleague, Tumarkin. We do red teaming, pen testing, and some research for Cisco systems. And we're happy to come here and talk about some of the research work that I've been doing and we've been doing that kind of complements what they were just talking about there. They were looking at a very white box. This is going to be showing kind of attack vectors of what's going on at a black box level and what's really happening out there in the world as these vulnerabilities come out. So we're talking about SoHo devices. Well, SoHo devices partly is just the Internet of Things, what they were saying, but in general, it is the small home office, which is a little misleading because most of them are just regular homes that use these types of devices. Everyone here, I'm sure, has a wireless router, a modem, probably an IP cam, maybe a copier of those sort of things. Some of the devices that you would find out there, and there are lots of them, millions, hundreds of millions of these devices, and they're getting even more weird and bizarre. But yeah. These are the two we want to talk about today. Modems and routers. Why?
Well, first of all, some vendors. These are, doesn't mean that they're vulnerable or anything, but these are vendors of chips, of devices that
vulnerable,
are...
not vulnerable.
We're not pointing fingers yet.
Yeah.
Yet.
So, what was I talking about? I don't remember.
Yeah, sorry. So devices and features.
Yeah. So I started researching this based on UPnP. I wanted to go in there, and I heard Daniel Garcia's talk at DEF CON 19 about UPnP stacks.
You're jumping ahead.
Are we? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So first of all, we're going to, discuss features of SoHo devices. As you obviously know if you have a home router, you know that your router does your DNS resolution, it calls your ISP, it does routing and stuff. And most of them have all sorts of services inside your home, a web server, SSH, telnet, and these sort of neat features like file sharing and mounting USB drives and stuff like that. As Kyle discussed, there's probably hundreds of millions of these devices facing the internet at any given moment, and that number is growing rapidly. They're often handed out by ISPs, and in a fairly standardized manner, so you are going to find a lot of duplicate devices across specific ISPs. So basically, yeah, you can go back to your UPnP research.
Yeah, so back around 2012, we started researching UPnP. UPnP, as you may or may not know, is a privileged service that has unique permissions on the devices that it's running, also DNLA and HNAP. And some other researchers are out there. I know Daniel Garcia, H.D. Moore, and some others were looking at it. So I started gathering up some routers and modems. That's what I wanted to focus on. And about 4 years ago, the competition for the router market, because of the high-speed internet growth around the world, became devastatingly blew up, and they all started putting a lot of services in these things, a lot of services in these devices.
Right.
So I said, well, I'm going to take a look at the web services first. And so I pulled the first one out, which happened to be, an ASUS router. And within about 20 minutes, I found clear text password. I'm like, shit, I don't need to do UPnP. It's a clear text password. So I grabbed the next one, clear text password. Different vendor, different model. Next one, I could go right to the administrative console. So the 75 was just found in the period of May to June. And disclosing these was a nightmare. This was his idea.
Yeah, my little touch. So basically, there's a lot of very basic stuff that you can find that is way higher, way more obvious than starting to dig into firmware and stuff like that, stuff that are at the web level. There are common vulnerabilities of all varieties. The stuff you would find on web applications and just poorly managed network devices, and those things are just out there, and they're very poorly secured.
Yeah, these are not hard hacks, as the guys before us were saying. These are very simple things, which just makes this very dangerous. And these are very simple things over wide swaths of IP space. One of the things we'll talk about briefly, which is a big one, are ISPs in developing countries are handing out these routers, usually ADSL, in large amounts, using default passwords which they enforce and change even if the end user had the chance to change it on SSH, Telnet.
Right.
So you're talking 700,000 people.
You're jumping ahead.
Yes,
so root causes are all the remote management services, and we're all capping this because it's always this. It's always the remote management and some sort of associated vulnerability that really allows you to root the device over the internet. So there's the reuse of common source code where the same mistake, the same thing can be found across firmwares, across devices. There's little to no product security testing, and we'll get into that. There's really a low profit margin. It's really a push to the buyer sort of driven market. So there's no point in fixing bugs. There's also a low reputation impact. There is some. It's actually, we're going to cover how vital this is, but it's still not enough sort of impact on a brand's reputation to be super vulnerable and horribly crap. There are far more features and services that are not built for these type of functions, and by type of functions we mean things that should be facing the internet.
So how many organizations have you gone into and seen a VPN server, a file sharing server, a DHCP server, all on the same server, running on the same OS? Ever? Why are we doing it on boxes that are pretty much meant for nothing more than routing? And I think that's an important point.
Yeah, a very important point. So these services, again, we return to remote access management, but again, this is the sort of thing. And this is sort of the last statement on this slide. This is sort of a platitude in product design, because everybody knows that security is the least important thing for a product, unless it's a security product, in which case it's right after being pretty. So backdoors left in by developers is another thing. We're going to touch on that a bit. But let's talk about numbers.
Okay. So this is where we get into the ugly part. How many are out there are vulnerable at this moment to very easy exploits? We're talking default passwords, things that would allow an attacker to either completely compromise the device or be able to change any of the configurations on the device, namely DNS, remote credentials. 25 million is about where we're at right now. I think that's a very conservative number. We've been looking at the growth in growing developing nations, and the growth is going so quickly that and the vulnerabilities that they have aren't going away; they're getting even worse. And a high-speed connection in one country is no different than a high-speed connection in another. If you're an attacker and you want to DDoS somebody, if you can grab these up and put 50,000 devices together and say you want to attack a corporation, how many corporations could withstand that kind of assault using DNS amplification, recursive attacks?
So let's talk about discovering these sort of vulnerable devices. So if you want to go by ISP, you look at their IP space, A records, pointer records, scan it for known vulnerable devices, and you're done. You have your future botnet infrastructure set up for you.
And this is happening right now. I mean, this is not something that's...
So, and you can always just go by Shodan and look for vulnerable devices, which is always sweet. And this is Shodan from System Shock, so God bless her. So this is usually perpetuated by the fact that there's a really high expectation of your IT team to always update their stuff, but there's none from end users, because when you expect somebody to install firmware or a patch, you really expect them to sort of at least know what they're doing, or at least what that means and how often.
And to add to that, that's even if the developers actually do a patch. In 60% of the cases, they don't even care to do a patch. They'll just take the hit on the PR and move on.
Right. So default passwords, obviously, this is something that is still very prevalent in this world, that devices don't prompt you to change the password. You plug it in and it works. And then you just, grab the version from somewhere because they freely disclose that, and you can just look for the manual. And again, services exposed to the internet. Nobody closes their own services, and if you're going to sell a router that has a file sharing capability, it's going to be on by default. So that everybody can see and be amazed by how you share your videos of cats.
And this is an important thing. The remote management function, the port 844443, to get in to administrate your router or your modem remotely, is an insane idea, which took root because it was this race to create all these different services to make the products look more appealing to the consumers. But there's only a few. How many people have gone on a road trip and said, oh, I need to change my SSID, and dialed back into their router and changed their SSID? But they didn't understand the consequences of putting these web servers sitting out there, no logging going on, very, very poor design, all this common code. Get through them. I mean, some of them just, you go to the front page and there's the password. And so that's a really important point, is remote management access is really one of the biggest problems out there.
So, this is perpetuation by design. This is a good example of a case that Kyle just bumped into.
Okay, yeah. So this is kind of a vulnerability that's being disclosed today and tomorrow publicly. This is a couple of these vulnerabilities have already been found previously on different models, although I don't believe anyone had put together that they were all related. What it has to do with is there are ADSL modems, and there is a Chinese manufacturing company that creates the firmware using a micro HTTPD 1.19 web server, and they've been doing this from 2007. This stuff is sold to all of the vendors, about 14 we've gotten so far, and then the vendors rebrand them, sell them to the ISPs.
Right, that's what modify means, by the way. They don't heavily modify it, they just add their brand logo and ship it.
So we have these ADSL really bad firmware with massive vulnerabilities, sold to 14 vendors. I mean, if you go out and buy a Belgian Netgear, these things, a lot of them, they don't actually create the firmware or the web server. They're buying it from third parties and bringing it and licensing it, right? So the first vulnerability that was found, which is a directory traversal, which is very important, was discovered in 2010. Since then, it's been reported and had CVEs 4 different times. The last one was on a Netgear WR600.
No names. You need to disclose.
No, that's not. So, so 4 times, 5 times, this vendor knew, not even an email. They didn't even care. So what we found is, sadly, that this pyramid of different things, and we'll get to this in a second.
Oh, sorry.
This is a remote memory dump using an HTTP call. Here, I had a couple of ISPs. So what we found is there are about 1.1 million ADSL modems out there that are currently have 4 critical vulnerabilities that allow for instant control of the router's configuration and system. So one of them being the directory traversal, but thanks to poor bin files and compiling, we were able to decompile and find that they had devmem open with no authentication. So using the directory traversal, you could dump devmem. I mean, whenever you even use devmem,
right,
and you should see it. I mean, it's glorious. You see all this code just flying out. And on some of them, about 15%, they turned it on so you can see outgoing headers in live traffic.
Okay, so there's that. And
anyway, that'll be out tomorrow. There's also the backdoor in 1 million. There's about 700,000 of them have a backdoor account that can only be accessed remotely by anyone, but you can't change it locally or access it locally.
Right.
Yeah.
So I really hope the videos work. I don't think they are. I can't.
Can you click?
No, I can't.
There you
Oh,
go.
there we go.
Okay. So this was one of my first disclosures in 2013. This was the AI cloud. I'm sure some of y'all heard about the ASUS router issues, FTP, clear text pass, where you can mount these routers as web dev and then have read-write access to them.
Right. So this is a very complex hack. You browse to SMB, and when it asks for your stuff, you click cancel.
This was not a glorified hack where I'm like, yes!
So this is exactly the sort of thing we were talking about when we say you don't need to reverse engineer the firmware, which I bet you can find amazing things there, but like, okay, so you're saying that maybe, okay, so you can access the file shares on this thing, but you can't compromise the device. I mean, maybe you can use it as a, well, okay, so you can just browse to this file and open it, and it has the credentials in it. So you just download the credentials and access the device. It's, again, it's not rocket science, it's barely even hacking.
Yeah, and these were the devices that had the FTP open by default to anonymous access, and the one that wasn't fixed for 8 months, and about 50 to 60,000 devices with hard drives plugged into the USB had their data downloaded multiple times by nefarious characters.
Right.
We asked them. They said, "Well, it's a feature. Why is it a feature? It's called infinite sharing." Infinite sharing.
Of all your stuff.
Screw you, 0 day.
So this is again a simple grep command because the output of this file is a bit messy.
So this is Western Digital.
Yeah, but
and they
this
had 4.
Again, it's just a file that's facing, and you gotta.
Anyone in this room can do these. And they had 4. They never even replied to my emails. And this is Western Digital, and that was pretty sad. I mean, I'm not trying to they have some good products, so I'm not playing one against the other.
Right.
But I'm just saying what the facts are in some of these cases.
So this is a very basic external request, and
this is
it's kind of fuzzy, but it reads username equals support, password equals support.
Don't want to use the second one. This is that one that's being disclosed today and tomorrow.
Right.
As you can see, there is a backdoor that allows only remote access. You can only do it from remote. You can't use it from, and it just lets you right in administratively. And it's by design.
Right.
Because how many ISPs actually go into the modems to? None.
Yeah, none. Hopefully.
So we had hundreds of those different ones.
So let's discuss what a malicious sort of threat actor would be able to do with these devices. So this is going to be obvious to most of you, but let's imagine that there's a teleworker trying to access their employee portal over HTTPS, and they're going to a DNS server. First of all, it goes through their SoHo device, which goes to a higher authority for the actual IP address, which returns it, and the user gets to where they want to go. Given an evil SoHo DNS server, which you can, automate this sort of poisoning activity where you poison the DNS server, the malicious server responds with whatever the hell it wants, and sends somebody to some sort of relay, SSL strip, whatever. This is one of 1,000 things you can do. Really, there's so many things you can do just with DNS poisoning. Sky's the limit because you can pretty much fake any sort of activity. Or
one of the projects we're working on is every packet that goes out gets duplicated in a DDoS attack. One goes out and just changes using hex inject to the IP that you're DDoSing. So if you do that with, say, 25,000 devices using the DNS amplification service, and you're just cloning it, how in the world would a corporation or a government be able to fight back against a very wide range area, geographically ISP land, coming at them with that kind of traffic? And it's something to think about because it's happening, and we've seen it in some ISPs that we've worked with.
Right. So there's, the classic botnet. You have a ton of devices, and a device with a gigabyte or 100 megabytes of outbound traffic is a device with 100 megabytes of outbound traffic. It doesn't matter if it's your router or your computer that, bit it with the terrible malware. And yeah, this is pretty classic stuff, and you can already see a lot of this sort of behavior in the wild. Top left is my favorite I relate to it the most. Lizard Squad used home routers to DDoS Microsoft's Xbox Live and Sony's PlayStation Network over Christmas, which is lovely. It's just lovely.
And don't kid yourselves, they have at least probably 100,000 routers right now from the traffic.
Right, and they also evolved this. They started selling it as a service. And this is good times. This is happening really, really commonly.
Yeah, and one of the biggest issues, most of these are run on busy boxes. They're not full kernel. Some are, which I love, because then I'm downloading apt-get and I'm installing my own thing. But on these busy boxes, as you may know, most of the time when they inject some other code, it lives in memory. So when the device is rebooted, it goes away. One of the things that a lot of bad people and good people are working on is persistence, and that's the key. Persistence allows for, a much longer. And someone's home device, who's going to be doing forensics on it? Who's going to be looking at the log files? How do they even know they're being attacked? As long as they get to Facebook, most of them are happy.
Right. So
the real prostitutes, that was weird.
Yeah, the real prostitutes is a weird story.
These.
So let's talk about the Internet of Things and SoHo devices, because Internet of Things is a nice buzzword for everything has its own internet address. So you consider that a lot of vendors are not designing to be internet facing, which is not really okay, but I don't know, I guess it's fine. I guess it's common practice. But if the SoHo device is compromised and people can look into your network, was the Baby Monitor's vendor concerned with security at all? Did you change the default password when you plugged it in? And did you apply the day one patch for, I don't know, easy remote compromise? And when you consider things that people are actually considering connecting to the internet, you're exposing your smart oven to the internet, and somebody hacks you and sets a fire in your home. So I know it's sort of like hand waving, but the reason these things are dangerous is because you think you're protected because you're not exposed to the internet, when in fact, in many ways, you are. So the internet is trying to access your home. You're probably being scanned, what, 20 times a day?
Yeah, we were pulling off some logs that I was sent with some modems that were being attacked, and they were averaging anywhere between 20 to 40 generic packet injection. Now, we're just scans. They were actually trying to generically inject something or to look for generic code vulnerabilities.
Right. So when you consider your home network, there's your SoHo device. It's nice. It missed the right. There's the SoHo device, and that's pretty much keeping the internet out, right? But if it's just easily hacked, I can just use known vulnerabilities, use default passwords, use OpenSSH. Doesn't matter. We're inside already. So there's sort of a lot of examples of devices that are sort of Internet of Things oriented. Like NAS is pretty much the first Internet of Things thing, right? I mean, network storage. But you can see all sorts of really like creepy sort of situations where people are looking into your home, and you really have to ask how this happens. And the answer is right there. It's in those simple, easy to make into a worm vulnerabilities that are very, very annoyingly common.
Yeah, and that guy was trying to actually, I know they're saying a lot about Russian hackers. He was trying to make a point. He had been contacted being, what's up with these default things? I don't agree with what he did, but I understand it. He's trying to expose it so people start to go, hold on, there's a problem here. So.
Yeah. So not a lot of people, it's not a very lucrative market to pen test and find 0 days on SoHo devices. Again, there's no bug bounties, and you're not likely to bump into this in your standard penetration test because corporations are going to use commercial grade stuff.
Yeah, and as an independent
routers.
Yeah, and as an independent researcher, you go up against a lot of legal problems, and you get threatened a lot, legal action. It's not a fun process to go through.
Right. So vendors, ISPs, end users, they're all very apathetic towards this. It's just a risk they're willing to take. Everybody is, kind of. There's no way to do real forensic work on these things in case an attack has occurred, unless if the attacker was clever, you're not going to find much.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest problems. And it's a low risk and high return attack, which is why a lot of people are focusing on it, and which is why I hope the security community starts to see what's going on a little bit better with these devices, so we can work on that. The ISPs being a good one.
Yeah. So again, like we said, nobody wants to see their brand name on the news as being responsible for 120,000 broken networks, like home networks. But the buzz is still low. People are still buying from vulnerable or known vulnerable vendors, and nobody cares about a patch. And eventually, people are looking to shove as many features into these things as possible. But they still want to keep the low cost of producing them and pushing them to as many end users as possible.
My favorite was a D-Link had a panel, all their features, and one of them was advanced firewall protection. And the first one was UPnP.
Which is ancient, yeah.
UPnP is advanced firewall.
Yeah, it's not. So, and this is another problem that needs to be considered, is that when you get bad ISPs that sell bad sort of firmware and sort of vulnerable devices in mass, and they're, laying fiber optics right now, you can start thinking about what happens when somebody rams CDNs, when somebody rams countries. It's a very, very, very serious issue. So this is not a traffic generated.
It's traffic generated.
Yeah,
that wasn't SoHo devices. For
yeah, it wasn't SoHo devices.
It was using NTP amplification attacks, and 400 gigabytes. If anyone realizes that's pretty damn big. That's a lot. That's a lot of traffic. And
clogged the internet basically, and it's. Something that you need to consider is that 25,000 devices with a gigabyte line outside is something that's already happening.
So because these devices often have DNS recursion and DNS resolution on the device, so you're actually resolving. So you're having amplification attacks built into these devices, right? So how hard would it be to write a bash script to compromise 20,000 devices if you knew the IP space and you knew the vector and what configurations you want to change? Not very hard at all.
So
deep amplifications are a little bit more difficult, but
yeah,
this is one of those things that are happening now.
So you care because you have people who work for your company who work from home, and they access the office through a VPN, but their entire home network is exposed to the internet. So instead of going through the main, the front door and attacking a website or attacking through dub or whatever, you just attack a person's home and you can own his stuff and start working your way into an organization through an employee's home. And
this is what happened about a year and a half ago when some defense contractors in the U.S. were popped. They found that their employees were compromised at home. To get the credentials to get access to their networks.
This is the sort of DNS fraud we mentioned earlier is sort of dissolving insurance companies in the sense that the more they happen, the higher the insurance costs and the lower the returns. And it's sort of generating into an actual, it could degenerate into an actual economic problem. And yeah, there wasn't such a thing. There was no such thing as Linux malware.
Yeah, it was a
once.
joke about 10 years ago, right? I mean, you had Linux malware, lol. But it really is now the forefront of a lot of the malware, and I've seen some really, really crazy stuff. If you're able to reflash the firmware remotely, say you get a hold of their TRO69 credentials, and you're able to build a Eagle TRO69 provisioning server. What's stopping you from reprovisioning that firmware the way you want it to be, or the configurations?
Right. So yeah, sort of. There's it's sort of yeah.
It's a joke.
It's pretty self-explanatory that we're worried, but in a fun way.
Yeah, because if you can't laugh at, you know.
Yeah. So what happens when people gain control over yay devices? So you can ask what if, but it's like, okay, so this is actually, I told you, the slides are missing. It should point to the 500,000 figure, which is something that has already happened.
When they were using it to steal credentials, I don't know if you would say fortunately or unfortunately.
Right. So this is just, quick math of let's assume that the vulnerability is you can exploit something or push something with a single request. This is, simple math. You won't be breaking a sweat compromising about 10 to 15,000 devices. You said the exact math was around 12 when you.
Yeah, I mean, so if you know
but
you know
it's
the
not
IP
exact.
space and you know what your configuration change in like a DNS, yeah. I mean, it's give or take. It doesn't really matter what it is. Is one person can own a lot of machines very quickly, and if they are little, they have to have more skill to know what to do with them once they're compromised with DNS or whatever type of attacks. Stealing credentials is the big one right now. Doing fake DNS servers. That's
Right.
the most of that.
So yeah, if we can consider, for example, that 1 terabyte per second DDoS is not even as science fiction as we'd hope it would be. We are going out of business if somebody decides to just get up one day and own India through a really crap router. So when it comes to remediation, there's definitely a chain here of culprits, of people who are responsible for this, and this includes every single one of us, because when an ISP should always consider that trusted brands should not be automatically trusted. Just because they're a trusted vendor doesn't mean they can skip security audits.
I think this is a perfect example. We had a coworker ask us, well, is there anything wrong with our router? And here in the UK, we're like, sure, we'll look at it. And we're not going to tell any of the... And
This happened just now.
yeah,
just 2 hours
I mean,
ago.
this is how easy it is. The whole thing is find an ISP, find out what devices they're running, go to their support site, and find out what their default password is. Then, voila. So we found that this particular ISP has most of their devices running default passwords here in the UK. I mean, and this is prevalent in the US and everywhere else too.
Very common practice. Also, the remote management. It's
Yeah, and it's by default, port 8080 is open, or port 80. And I mean,
Both.
yeah, and these are very dangerous things. I mean, it's as fun as it is to really research it and go after it.
right.
Oh,
So
what this is.
we also need to consider that when you buy cheap and you fall on your face, you look extra liable. But still, we wish that there was a little more, noise going on when somebody pushes poor firmware or poor device on his users, and it's bad.
Yes, yeah. Some of the devices I've tested were from I got from developing nations, and these devices, brands you never heard of. CGI files go to all of them. Everything unauthenticated. It was almost like the username and password was just a ha ha ha. We have a username and password, so you can just
Yeah, there's nothing there.
Yeah, and that's something that who's going to address that with these ISPs? Who's going to tell the ISP, hey, stop that? I mean, we're going to get governments involved. We'll go over nation borders. It's a very
Eventually, I think it's inevitable that somebody's going to get a government involved in an ISP providing an attacker with a botnet for free, So the device vendors should really, get their shit together and design, develop, audit as if you were selling to an enterprise, and really consider all these sort of things. You have to commit to patching before you release a new device, no matter if it's not profitable. You're putting your users at risks, and your users and the victims of people who get attacked by these malicious SoHos.
And an important point, running NICTO and apt scan against your router is not security testing. Thank you.
Right. So default passwords is a thing that I think generally is sort of a bad idea. When you plug something in, when you install something, it should prompt for a new password, and there should be no such thing as a password in a manual. That's dumb. Because somebody somewhere is going to forget to set it. And this is the sort of thing you bump a lot into in red teams and penetration tests. And of course, internet-facing services are a bad idea. And if it's something that is not the base, the main feature, like a router is supposed to connect your network to the internet. That's it. And those sort of things, if people want to use them, they can use them. But if you enable them by default, then all the grandmothers out there also have it on by default, and they're not using it. Yes, or some of the grandmothers that don't want to.
Yeah, the end users, they get the thing, and it's like, turn all the things on. I mean, everything. Turn it all on.
Right.
FTP, Samba.
A Christmas tree of features.
Just turn it on because it's there. But, and you can't blame them. They're not security folks, and to necessarily understand the implications of, as we had in one instance where the router has a VPN service, PPTP, and there was a way to own it through port 443 and get PPTP connections. What do you think the criminals were doing with these PPTP connections? That they don't even know that they were on the device.
Right.
It's kind of scary.
So, as end users, always patch. This is something that should go without saying nowadays, but this is something you need to educate other people to. Always patch, always make sure you change your password into a strong, unique one. Password 1, 2, 3, it's not a password.
And password
it's a joke.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is not better.
Yeah. Disabling all unnecessary services, and if possible, make noise when you realize that there's a culpable ISP out there or a vendor, and buy a new one. Like, you're the customer. You can change stuff. Even if your vendor gives you their own device, consider that, call them and ask if you can use other devices, if there's no such thing as like MAC stuff and serial number tests.
I want to lead into the next one with that for the security community.
Right, which is...
It's sometimes, and I've done it myself and made a lot of angry people, but sometimes you have to make noise and you have to take things public. It may hurt people, or after you've given them 6 months to fix something. We see now some of the bigger vendors doing some of these things, like hiring real pen testers, doing things like enforcing password rules. The way to do it is all of us, if you find something, you got to make noise, I think. Is right now the best method we have. There really aren't a lot of security corporations that are built just to test home devices or small office devices or IP cams. Mm-hmm.
So again, research on these things. You want to get your name on an easy CVE? We have a new one from this afternoon on, a big ISP.
But it's not as easy, yeah. I think that's misleading.
It is misleading, but sometimes you can get a really easy one.
Once you get a letter in the mail from a lawyer saying, we're
right,
going to sue you.
Cease and desist.
Like,
don't touch our stuff.
Go ahead and sue me, I got nothing anyway.
So again, utilizing this sort of exposure and applying pressure to vendors and ISPs, and educating is always the best way to remain secure. And if you need to just disconnect something, just disconnect it from the internet. And this might be a good idea for, vendors, which is forensic capacities for home devices. Yeah. This is going to be a future.
We're seeing some, and maybe also work for some of these corporations that are doing threat analysis and threat intelligence, looking at traffic patterns and looking at some that are coming from SoHo devices. And I think that's really a good step to find out where these attacks are coming from and how to stop them and how to remediate them. And it's difficult because you don't know where the attackers came from. Most of these are using botnets. When I was testing these, I had the permission from the ISP to test a couple of 24 subnets. And so the attacks we were seeing, 50% of them were coming from other SoHo devices, NASs, DVRs, which makes you think, how in the world would you ever catch a person and stop them? But with traffic and pattern analysis and some good practices, maybe there is a way that we can start to have a way to fight back, at least forensically.
Okay, and with that, we're pretty much done. I think we actually made it. I thought we'd have too many slides.
Right.
Unbelievable.
So are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes.
Like a reaction, my mother died in a hospice and I got told by Apple, we'll reset your password in 24 hours. You just made note of the fact that there was a redirection due to a poor Linux implementation on the NTP.
Mm-hmm.
The problem's been that since that, my ISP has blocked all NTP across the network.
Because of amplification attacks, yes.
Yeah, so am I more vulnerable now that none of my devices does a decent timestamp, along with everyone else? Or am I protected from the vulnerable code that I've already updated?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Like most of you would notice, SMB is also blocked by ISPs. But go on a VPN, and then SMB.
Correct, sir.
Then you're SMBing over the internet, which is so. The answer is that I think this is their way right now of fighting back, is doing things like
Overreacting.
but
Viruses is in front of the reaction from a hoax.
yeah, it's
Far worse than the real thing.
it's misplaced action. It's good that they're attempting to fix these things, but they really, I think, especially in that case, can make bad choices. So, and this is something that we have to come to grips with. How, as a security community, we can deal with this.
Any more questions? Anybody? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.